three to four big things that I really see. There's a death of macro going on right now. Bonds, the FX markets. Yes, there is some movement, but generally I think people realize that the dollar, which is the big daddy of everything, 88% of world trade, cannot be allowed to move too far up or too far down. So it's been in a range for the last 5 or 6 years, up and down. So that leaves us with very limited opportunity sets in that kind of global macro world. Credit is also pinned lower. So what's interesting, well, equity markets are all-time high valuations. We can talk a bit about that later. But there are some big themes out there that are super interesting. One is the massive rise of digital assets. There is a parallel financial universe being built in front of our eyes, and people are slowly migrating across. People have no comprehension yet of how big this is. They're still bickering over, is Bitcoin an investment vehicle, without realizing the magnitude of what is actually going on. That's one. That's the biggest theme. It will remain probably the biggest theme that any of us have ever seen. And I talk about it. It's a supermassive black hole. It's making my job very difficult to even care about anything else. So that's the super powerful trend. There is a trend that will develop. I'm not bearish on the dollar. I actually think it goes higher for a bit, but I do think it's stable. I think the central banks, the Bank of International Settlements and others don't want the dollar to move much. And in that case, a stable dollar is very good for emerging markets. There's a technological revolution going on where countries that have aging, crappy old infrastructure can walk straight into a new digital world and gain huge productivity without the cost of a legacy system. So that's very bullish. Countries like India, North Africa, tons of countries. And so I think those assets are wildly underpriced versus developed markets. And that trend of, let's say, the US versus MSCI World is the most stretched it's been since 1954. So it's incredibly cheap. I think there is a continued rise in the disruption of technology. It's a secular theme that I think is very, very big and investable. And it will outperform over time, even though it's wildly overpriced right now. India's a gigantic market. It is bureaucratic, it's messy, it's difficult, but the Indian stock market keeps going up. And I've been bullish on it for a long time because it's coming from a lower base than China. And it's fraught with everybody saying, oh yeah, India will never sort its act out. Meanwhile, the stock market keeps going up. So a few years ago, they decided to demonetize. So they got rid of the large rupee notes, part political, part genius. The political side was to get more taxes in, and it was a populist thing by Modi. But the idea was to do that and start moving towards digital India. So digital India was a big initiative. They created, and nobody talks about this, even Silicon Valley doesn't talk about it, UPI, the Universal Payments Interface, which is an open source payments interface that processed instant payments without a middleman faster than the Bitcoin blockchain. It's not blockchain based, stunning. They then moved to a national ID called Aadhaar, which is like a usual national ID, but one stage further, they did it via fingerprint or retina scan.
Yeah.
So that Aadhaar number now links to your bank. You can actually go in India and pay for a pint of milk with your fingerprint. Now, it's not happening at scale yet, but they got 1.2 billion people onto the Aadhaar system. So they're now all registered so that they can now open banks. They can open all this stuff. What Aadhaar also has is something incredible called India Stack. This is visionary. Part of India Stack is that your KYC documents are authenticated once and held according to your Aadhaar, so therefore your fingerprint. So you can go and open a mobile phone and they ask you for proof of address, all that bullshit. You just go, sure, there you go. Or you do it from your phone. Okay, that's a new world. Now, it's still not being fully utilized in India, but it's happening. And it's all open networks, APIs.
the word behavioral economics instead of behavioral engineering. And I think that's a generous framing, but in reality, it is a group of network owners who have figured out how to engineer and manipulate human behavior to maximize profits, right? And then there's maybe other.
Humans have done that forever, right? It's no. The advertising industry is exactly the same.
Yeah.
In fact, every salesman does it. In fact,
for sure, we've just supercharged it. Yeah.
We've just supercharged. Technology has changed the game on it.
Yeah.
Because it's now, because if you think of the old model of advertising, which was very powerful, it was a push-only environment where you had limited data, so you had limited ability to understand your impact. Now, with big data and behavioral economics, you can engineer it.
There's very little hard work delivery system, right? You think about the network effect of a fax machine. Very similar. The first fax machine's not worth anything. But then we've got to roll out the purchase of all this stuff. It's like hardware. It's a hardware delivery system. That's not going to function well in an exponential growth rate. Whereas downloading something like Facebook and becoming a member when that platform is there.
There's another interesting variant of this, which is Apple. So Apple created a community of people around brand. But what they did very cleverly is they massively underpriced when they walked in and created iTunes. They massively underpriced music. Why? What they did was they got hundreds of millions of people using iTunes and then sold them hardware.
Yeah.
And made a fortune out of the hardware. Then they did it again with these earsets. Genius. So they created network effects and then created a problem and provided a solution. Really, really clever. Very different model, non-advertising led, product led. Yeah, and it doesn't feel so egregious to all of us because we actually like the product. It's clever, but it's still network effects.
Yeah. Right. So it seems to me like technology's got this built-in redundancy, like fashion, where something's just not cool anymore and thus needs to be replaced. The coat's warm, the pants work, but let's change the cut, the boot cut, let's change the look, and that just makes it go away. And then you need the new thing, the new ear pod, the new iPod.
With the added dimension that the new tech typically has more features, right? Whereas for fashion, it's sort of like you need to stay fresh and cool, right? And there's an element of that, I think, to tech, certainly Apple tech, right? There's a cachet to having the most recent Apple product, right? And there's also this added benefit that it typically has more features that are useful and that further the network effects, right?